Also, in case you are watching this on YouTube, we always record these presentations and I put them on my YouTube channel. I want you to know that we are listener supported. So if you like these presentations and want to support this mission, consider clicking on one of the links that will be below this video. Now, this presentation was suggested by one of our members, so I'm going to dedicate it to him, Michael Hamers. He sent me a whole lot of images of great paintings, as well as several informative links on the sacredness of trees. So he made my presentation much, much easier, and really he should get half of the credit for what you're going to experience today. Now, my first introduction to a special relationship to trees came through the classic children's story, The Giving Tree, by Shel Silverstein. I know many of you are familiar with it. It recounts the relationship between a boy as he ages into an elderly man and an apple tree. And over the years, the tree keeps giving to the boy at different stages of his life. And the boy really just keeps taking until at the, when the boy is an elderly man, the tree is only a trunk. But then all the elderly man who's still called boy by the tree needs is a nice place to sit and rest because he's tired. So it's a wonderful story and I highly recommend it. Well, human beings have always had a special kinship with trees. Ancient religions have seen trees as protectors of great prophets. In this image, you see that a temple has been built under a great Bodhi tree, which was where Siddhartha sat and became enlightened, became the Buddha. And of course, fruit-bearing trees have been sacred in every culture for their ability to give life by providing food, but also occasionally giving death in case the fruit is poisonous, or the fruit, as in the case of the Garden of Eden, could give secret knowledge as well. And this was widespread in Mesopotamian and Middle Eastern cultures, this idea of trees giving not only life, but wisdom as well. Speaking of life, this is The Tree of Life by Gustav Klimt. The tree is a natural symbol for the processes of life because it too grows through stages. It experiences seasonal death and rebirth as well. It also represents the structure of the universe as many ancient cultures understood it. You see, the roots of a tree are the underworld, the trunk is earthly life, and the pinnacle of the tree is way up in the sky, and so it is kind of a pointer to the heavenly realms. And of course, the cross came to represent a tree of life. Now, in this image that you see here, Gustav Klimt has tried to convey a life-giving magical energy almost radiating off of this tree. Many cultures saw trees as totems of ancestral spirits. Native Americans were admired by all the great European romantic painters and American painters for their veneration of the natural world, seeing the sacred in all things. Now, I chose this particular painting because, well, it contains a mountain or two. You see on the left there, it contains a large body of water, perhaps a sea, whose sacred qualities we explored in the previous two presentations. But notice the natural element that dominates this work is the towering tree in the middle. Why is so much emphasis being paid to that tree in Durand's painting? Well, I'm going to move on to a select group of artists, and we will take about a minute of silence, as we've done in the previous presentations, about a minute of silence to contemplate the impact of the paintings on us. Again, what ideas percolate? What feelings well up? What associations come to mind when you look at some of these images? Are you ready? Here we go. Very unusual rendering of a tree. Just take about a minute with it. Caspar David Friedrich was a German 19th century Romantic painter who infused his landscapes with otherworldly energies. The Romantic painters thought the best subject to symbolize divinity was nature. You sat with this one. It conveys some rather lofty ideas, I believe, and deep sentiments. Take a moment to reflect on what the message for you is personally before we move on to another Friedrich painting. When you look at this painting, take a moment to look for details. There are lots of small little details in this painting that will expand its meaning for you. Notice the individual standing underneath that tree. It's a shepherd. And then notice right behind the tree, way off in the distance, you can see a church spire. Why do you think Friedrich included these little details in this work? Now let's move on to the last Friedrich painting we'll look at. Certainly a rather dark philosophical statement some of us might be receiving in this painting, from this painting. But it's a message that is essential for helping us appreciate the time that we have here, the life that we have been given on this earth. And now I'm going to move on to an amazing master painter of trees that I know all of you will recognize. Obviously, she could convey the beauty as well as the sensual nature of trees. Just take a moment to be with this painting before we move on to another. quite a bit different from Friedrich's trees. Look at her lines and the shading that she uses. Obviously, you're having a very different experience with her tree. Now, in the next two slides, I've included a Mary Oliver poem, but I'm still going to give you about a minute to look at the paintings before I start reading the poem. When I Am Among the Trees by Mary Oliver. When I'm among the trees, especially the willows and the honey locust, equally the beech, the oaks, and the pines, they give off such hints of gladness. I would almost say that they save me, and daily. I'll continue with the poem and then give you a minute afterwards to look at the painting. I am so distant from the hope of myself in which I have goodness and discernment and never hurry through the world, but walk slowly and bow often. Around me, the trees stir in their leaves and call out, stay a while. The light flows from their branches and they call again. It's simple, they say. And you too have come into the world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light and to shine. Now we'll move on to a painting I know some of you are familiar with by Georgio O'Keefe. This is one of her most famous tree paintings. It is the tree that I believe it's still standing in front of the tiny cabin that writer D.H. Lawrence lived in during, I think he moved in 1928. She painted it, painted this tree, which stands right out in front. There's a bench there. It still is there, I do believe. So if you visit this home, about 18 miles north of Taos, you can get this view. 20 years ago, I visited the D.H. Lawrence home. I think there are gates and security there now, but there wasn't at that time. I drove right up to the cabin and peeked in the windows, and I laid on the bench. And I enjoyed this view myself. It wasn't at nighttime. I think the night view makes it pretty special, but it was an amazing view. I was immediately drawn to do that out of instinct, not because I knew anything about this particular painting at all at the time. This is not only a dramatic view of a tree, but the artist is paying homage to a fellow artist, this one a literary one. The painting has taken on, I think, a greater spiritual significance as a memorial to the author, since he died less than a year after this was painted. Georgio O'Keefe said in the quote you can see, "I wish people were all trees, and I think I could enjoy them then." All right, obviously O'Keefe is an introvert. Now, O'Keefe did not mind what orientation the Lawrence tree, 1929, was presented at. Like a mandala, you could turn it and hang it from all different angles. It was able to convey a sense of wholeness and divinity, no matter which angle you look at it. However, she did specify that her personal preference was this view right here. The mental image I have of these two artists, D.H. Lawrence and Georgio O'Keefe, sharing a moment beneath this tree, maybe just high-level conversation, talking about the arts. I think that image is enticing to me. And I think Georgia wanted to memorialize that special moment by painting this tree. On to another one of her dramatic paintings of trees. Again, take a moment. Notice ideas, feelings, associations. Cottonwood may have been her favorite tree once she moved to New Mexico. Here's one that I think you'll find pretty interesting. I really think I could have made an entire hour-long presentation just on O'Keefe paintings of trees. She did so many of them, and all of them are so powerful and unique in many ways. Now on to one of my favorites. Where does this painting take you? What sort of visceral response do you have to it? Now we're going to go on to an artist that painted trees quite differently than any of the ones that we've seen so far. He's better known as an abstract modernist, Pierre Mondrian, but early in his life, he was captivated by trees as well. Take a quick moment to contemplate this work. Through his art, Mondrian aimed to, quote, articulate a mystic conception of cosmic harmony that lay behind the surfaces of humanity. His goal was to portray the relationship between spirituality and nature. But Mondrian believed that trees were a great symbol of the human experience. He was a theosophist. Some of you remember my presentations on theosophy. Remember a movement started by Madame Blavatsky, the Russian immigrant who traveled all over the world, particularly India and the Middle East. In theosophy, there's the belief that there's an underlying spiritual wisdom found in all faiths. So they would study all of the world's great spiritual traditions, as well as art, to discover that kernel of universal wisdom. Mondrian was a big believer and thought he could convey it in his art. he often got increasingly abstract in his depictions of trees. Think about how this one makes you feel. Someone in the chat said we might have a typo on Lawrence. That could be a possibility. I'll double check that later. Now, one more painting by Mondrian. In depicting standalone trees in this dramatic and abstracted way, Mondrian was seeking to discover some essential truth, not only about nature, but like I said before, about human beings. So the tree then is a kind of symbol of our own search for truth and meaning. Well, we can't discuss the art of trees without including this artist. The olive tree is sacred to most Mediterranean cultures, and especially in the Christian tradition, the olive grove was where Jesus would retreat for prayer and contemplation. After Van Gogh voluntarily entered the asylum at Saint Remy in the south of France in the spring of 1889, he wrote his brother Theo. He said, "I did a landscape with olive trees, which you are looking at right here, and also a new study of a starry sky." Van Gogh's letters make it clear that he created this particular intense, high, vibrant energy depiction of olive trees as a partner, as a kind of complement to this nocturne painting that I know you're all familiar with. Van Gogh felt that both pictures showed in complementary ways the principles he shared with his fellow painter Paul Gauguin regarding the artistic license painters have to not depict the, quote, photographic and silly perfection of some painters, in other words, intense realism, but to intensify the experience by peculiar choices of color and linear rhythms. There's an article that Mike Hamer shared with me titled "The Cypress Trees in the Starry Night, a Symbolic Self-Portrait of Vincent Van Gogh." So you see the cypress there on the left, the tall one. The writer of this article is claiming that this is actually a self-portrait. So before we move on to compare both of these paintings side by side, I just want you to take a moment and see if that makes sense to you. See what, if that is valid, what Van Gogh could be communicating about himself, his own nature in that cypress tree. And I find it interesting that just like Friedrich, Van Gogh puts a church in the background. It's dwarfed by the cypress. Some of you know Van Gogh had a falling out with the church. He didn't stop venerating God and nature and that sort of thing, and the moral teachings of Jesus, but he had a dramatic falling out with the church. And he began to admire Buddhism. So think about that when we compare these two. These were meant to be paired together. He was hoping some collector would purchase both. For Van Gogh, all of you who are familiar with his work will know that olive trees and cypresses were holy to him in some way. He felt great spiritual power in conveying them, and he did it over and over and over again. Take a moment now just to try to absorb this powerful, dramatic painting of olive trees. Hope you're taking note of how each painting affects you. Very different styles, very different use of color. Now on to one of my favorite depictions of a tree by Van Gogh. He said, "Sometimes I long so much to do landscape, just as one would go for a long walk to refresh oneself. And in all of nature, in trees, for instance, I see expression and a soul." Let's take a moment to see if you can experience that expression and soul in that cypress tree. Now on to our final artist. I think we should close today with the recent work of a contemporary artist and friend to some of you and to me listening today, Bill Ross. He lives in Loveland, or I believe it's Loveland. Just take a moment with this work. Now, in the next slide, I'm going to pair this work that you see right here with a poem and kind of conclude our time together with the poem while you get to look at this image. But before going on, just look at the painting for a moment, paying attention again to how it affects you, particularly at a visceral level. Now let's move on to that poem. It's called The Worst Thing. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her first name correctly, so I apologize if I am not, if you're familiar with her, but Keelan Harkin. It goes, "The worst thing we ever did was put God in the sky, out of reach, pulling the divinity from the leaf." I love that line. Pulling the divinity from the leaf, sifting out the holy from our bones, insisting God isn't bursting dazzlement through everything we've made, a hard commitment to see as ordinary, stripping the sacred from everywhere to put in a cloud man elsewhere, prying closeness from your heart. The worst thing we ever did was take the dance and the song out of prayer, made it sit up straight and cross its legs, removed it of rejoicing, wiped clean its hip sway, its questions, its ecstatic yowl, its tears. The worst thing we ever did is pretend God isn't the easiest thing in this universe, available to every soul in every breath. Well, thank you again for joining us for today's Art Brunch. I hope you enjoyed this series. And once again, remember, we're listener supported. I'm going to record this meeting, and if you desire to support our mission to explore the wisdom of the arts, spirituality, and the great ideas in order to find greater meaning and purpose, then see the various links below this video. We'd also appreciate it if you helped expand our reach by hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel as well. Thank you all again for your support of me as well over the last few years. I greatly appreciate it. And now the floor is open. Hello, this is Waverly Matthews, the director of WAMA Art Asylum. If you would like to become a member of our community and receive exclusive invitations to our live art brunches every Sunday, just fire me an email at waverlymatthews@gmail.com. We finish each presentation with a Q&A during which you can participate in an always enjoyable and lively discussion of the topic. Thank you for listening.